One moment, I was just waiting for my sister at the train station. The next, a police officer's unprovoked fist shattered my face and threatened to shatter my future. The air in the train station was thick with the usual cocktail of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and the faint electric tang of the third rail. It was the smell of arrival, of transition. For me, it was the smell of coming home, even if just for a weekend. I'd been on a train for 6 hours, crammed into a seat designed by someone who clearly hated the human spine. And all I could think about was my sister Maya's legendary lasagna and collapsing on her blessedly comfortable sofa. I stretched, my back popping in a dozen satisfying places, and pulled out my phone to text her I'd arrived. Platform 4, by the hot dog stand that smells like regret, I typed, a small smile playing on my lips. I leaned against a pillar, scrolling through emails and trying to shift my brain from work mode to family mode. The station was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and crying children. It was loud, but it was a familiar kind of loud. I was just another face in the crowd, a guy in a worn-out hoodie and jeans waiting for his sister. That's all I was. I felt a presence before I saw him. You know that feeling, the one where the air just shifts, gets a little heavier. I looked up from my phone and saw him, a police officer. He was built like a refrigerator, with a thick neck that strained against the collar of his uniform and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl of mild disappointment with the world. He wasn't looking at the crowd, he was looking at me. My internal threatometer, the one every black man is issued at birth, flickered from green to yellow. I hadn't done anything, I was just standing here. I made a point of looking back down at my phone, trying to project an aura of casual indifference. Don't make eye contact, don't look nervous, be boring, be invisible. The rules were second nature. But his boots kept coming closer, the rhythmic, heavy clump of them cutting through the station's general din. They stopped a foot in front of my sneakers. I sighed internally and slowly raised my head. "Got a problem?" he asked. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "No, officer, just waiting for my ride," I said, keeping my tone even and respectful. I held up my phone slightly as if to prove my point. "You just got off the 415 from the city?" "Yes, sir." "Let me see your ticket." It wasn't a question. I blinked, a little confused. I'd already passed through the gate, the conductor had already scanned it. But you don't argue, you comply. I fished the crumpled paper ticket from my pocket and handed it to him. He held it up, squinting as if it were written in a foreign language. "Says here you're going to Grand Central," he stated flatly. "Right, this is Grand Central," I said, trying not to sound sarcastic. He grunted, his eyes narrowing. "You look like you're in a hurry to be somewhere you're not supposed to be." It was one of those nonsensical, loaded statements designed to trip you up, to get a reaction. I took a breath. "I'm just tired from the trip, officer. I'm waiting for my sister to pick me up." "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, his voice rising just enough to turn a few heads. "You people always have a smart mouth." There it was. You people. The switch was flipped. My caution level went from yellow to bright flashing red. This wasn't about a ticket. This was about my face, my skin, my existence in this particular spot at this particular time. I decided the best course of action was to remove myself from the situation. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, taking a small step to the side. He moved with surprising speed, planting himself directly in my path. He was close enough now that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You're not going anywhere. You're being detained." Detained? My voice was starting to shake, a mix of fear and indignation. For waiting? For being tired? A small crowd was starting to form a semicircle around us. Phones were starting to emerge from pockets. The officer noticed. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "I said don't get smart," he barked, poking a thick finger into my chest. Instinct took over. "Get your hand off me," I said, my voice low and firm. I didn't yell, I didn't move, I just stood my ground. For him, that was the same as throwing a punch. I saw the shift in his eyes. The last bit of professional restraint, if there ever was any, just evaporated. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't say another word. His right hand, balled into a fist the size of a canned ham, shot out.
I didn't even have time to flinch. The impact was like a lightning strike. A flash of white-hot pain exploded behind my eye, and the world tilted violently on its axis. The gritty taste of concrete and copper filled my mouth as my head bounced off the station floor. A constellation of bright, jagged stars danced in my vision. Over the ringing in my ears, I could hear him screaming, "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" even though I was doing nothing but bleeding on the ground.
Through the fog of pain and confusion, one sound cut through the chaos. A woman's voice, sharp with panic, crying my name. "Marcus! Oh my God, Marcus!" It was Maya. She was here. I tried to push myself up to tell her I was okay, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. The last thing I saw before my vision swam completely into darkness was the look of pure, unadulterated horror on my sister's face. Waking up was like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. First came the muffled sounds, distorted and distant. Then the throbbing, rhythmic pain that seemed to sync with my own heartbeat. It was centered in my face, a hot, heavy pressure behind my right eye. I pried my eyelids open, and the fluorescent lights of a hospital room stabbed at me. I was in a bed, a thin, scratchy blanket pulled up to my chest. My first thought was a wave of relief. An ambulance must have come. I was safe. Then I tried to lift my left hand to touch my face, and it stopped short, tugged back by a sharp metallic clink. I looked down. A single handcuff was cinched around my wrist, the other end chained to the bed rail. The relief evaporated, replaced by an icy dread that was colder and sharper than the pain. The door swished open, and Maya rushed in, her face a mess of tear tracks and raw fury. She stopped dead when she saw I was awake, and then again when her eyes fell on the handcuff. "Oh, Marcus," she breathed, her voice cracking. She rushed to my side, her hand hovering over my swollen face, afraid to touch. "What happened?" I rasped. My jaw ached, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. "What's going on?" "They're lying," she said, her hands balling into fists at her side. "That monster, that cop, his name is Officer Miller. He wrote in his report that you were acting erratically, that you matched the description of a suspect in a robbery. A robbery, Marcus. He said he tried to question you and you became belligerent and took a swing at him." The words didn't make sense. It was like she was speaking a different language. Took a swing at him? A man who towered over me? A man with a gun and a badge? The absurdity of it was so profound it was almost funny. Except nothing about this was funny. I was the one with a fractured orbital bone, the one who couldn't see straight, the one chained to a hospital bed. "Maya, that's insane," I said, trying to sit up, but the world spun and I fell back against the pillows. "You were there. You saw him." "I know. I saw everything," she said, her voice rising with frantic energy. "I was screaming at him, telling him you hadn't done anything. More cops showed up and they pushed me back. They treated me like I was the criminal. They wouldn't let me ride in the ambulance with you. They said you were in custody." Custody. The word hung in the sterile air between us. It was a brand. It meant that in the official version of events, the version that would be typed up and filed away, I was the aggressor. Officer Miller was the victim. My entire reality had been inverted. The truth didn't matter. All that mattered was the uniform and the lie he was hiding behind. A wave of utter helplessness washed over me, so powerful it almost drowned out the pain. What chance did I have? It was my word against a police officer's. "But people were filming," I said, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. "I saw them. I saw the phones." Maya nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "I know. I was a mess, but I had enough sense to get the numbers of 2 people before the other cops started telling everyone to disperse. A college kid named Ben and a woman who was waiting for her daughter. I've already called them. They're both terrified, but they said they have it on video. They saw the whole thing." She took a deep breath. "And I've already called someone, a lawyer,
A friend of a friend from work recommended her. She's supposed to be a shark. Her name is Miss Davies, and she's on her way here now. Just hearing that my sister had already started to fight back was like a shot of adrenaline. The helplessness receded, replaced by a slow burning anger. He wasn't going to get away with this. This wasn't just some anonymous face in a crowd he could beat down and forget about. I was Marcus Washington. I had a sister who would move mountains for me. I had a life, and I had the truth on my side. Miss Davies arrived 20 minutes later. She was a short, impeccably dressed woman with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She listened intently as I recounted every detail, from the moment I saw Officer Miller approaching to the moment I woke up in the hospital. She took notes, her face a mask of professional calm, but I could see a storm brewing in her eyes. His report is a work of fiction, designed to do one thing: justify the use of force, she said, her voice crisp and clear. They will charge you, Marcus, resisting arrest, probably assault on an officer. They have to cover their own liability. Our job is to prove that Officer Miller was the sole aggressor in an unprovoked attack. Those videos Maya told me about will be our entire case. We need to get them, and we need to get them now. As if on cue, the door opened again. This time it wasn't a doctor or Maya. It was another police officer, younger than Miller, with a clipboard in his hand, an expression of bored detachment on his face. He didn't look at me, but at the paperwork he was holding. "Marcus Washington?" he asked, his tone flat and administrative. "I am his legal counsel," Miss Davies said, stepping between the officer and my bed. "Anything you have to say to my client can go through me." The officer gave her a brief, unimpressed glance before looking back at his clipboard. "I'm not here to question him. I'm here to serve him." He cleared his throat and began to read in a monotonous drone. "By the authority of the state, you are hereby charged with 1 count of assault in the 2nd degree on a police officer, a Class C felony, 1 count of resisting arrest, and 1 count of disorderly conduct." He tore a sheet from the clipboard and placed it on the small table next to my bed. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving a profound, deafening silence in his wake. A Class C felony. The words echoed in the sterile room long after the officer had left. It felt like a physical blow, just as real and stunning as the first one. This wasn't just about a lie on a report anymore. This was my life. A felony conviction would shatter everything I'd worked for. My job, my future, my ability to walk through the world without a scarlet letter branded on my forehead. All of it was hanging in the balance because one man with a badge and a temper decided he didn't like the look of my face. The anger I felt earlier morphed into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. Miss Davies was a rock in the storm. "This is standard procedure," she said, her voice cutting through my rising panic. "It's an intimidation tactic. They throw the book at you, hoping you'll get scared and take a plea deal for a lesser charge. We're not taking any deal. We're fighting this with everything we have." She turned to Maya. "The arraignment will probably be tomorrow morning. They'll transfer him to central booking as soon as the hospital discharges him. Maya, your job is the videos. Call Ben and the other witness. Get those files. Email them to me, text them, bring them to my office on a thumb drive. I don't care how. Just get them." Maya nodded, her expression grim but determined. "I'm on it." She squeezed my good hand. "Don't you worry, Marcus. We're gonna fix this." The next 24 hours were a blur of indignity. I was discharged from the hospital with a splitting headache and a prescription for painkillers, only to be led out in handcuffs to a waiting patrol car. The ride to central booking was silent and jarring. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through my head. The processing was a nightmare of paperwork, fingerprints, and a mug shot where my right eye was swollen completely shut. I was just another number in a system that had already decided I was guilty. I spent the night in a crowded, noisy holding cell, the thin mattress doing little to cushion my aching body. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying the incident over and over, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it all went so wrong. Was it when I looked up from my phone? When I told him I didn't want any trouble? Or was it predetermined the second I stepped off that train? The arraignment was the next morning. I was shuffled into a courtroom with a dozen other men in matching orange jumpsuits. I felt groggy and disoriented. When my name was called, I stumbled forward, my hands cuffed in front of me. Miss Davies was there, a sharp professional presence in a dark suit. She entered a plea of not guilty in a voice that boomed with confidence. The prosecutor, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, read the charges aloud, painting me as a violent thug who attacked a decorated officer of the law. He requested bail be set at $50,000, citing the serious nature of the assault. I felt my blood run cold. There was no way my family could come up with that kind of money. But then Miss Davies stepped up. "Your Honor," she began, "my client, Mr. Washington, is the victim here, not the aggressor. He is a college-educated graphic designer with no criminal record whatsoever. He was viciously assaulted by Officer Miller in an unprovoked attack that was witnessed by numerous bystanders." She paused for dramatic effect. Bystanders who, I might add, captured the entire incident on video. A murmur went through the courtroom. The prosecutor's bored expression flickered with something else, annoyance, maybe even concern. He conferred with another lawyer at his table. "Your Honor," Miss Davies continued, pressing her advantage, "we have two separate video files showing the entire interaction. They clearly show Officer Miller initiating contact, escalating the situation, and then striking my client in the face while Mr. Washington had his hands down at his sides. The only resisting my client did was being unconscious on the floor of Grand Central." She placed a thumb drive on the lectern. "This is evidence we will be presenting at trial. Given that the prosecution's case is based solely on the demonstrably false report of the officer who assaulted my client, we ask that Mr. Washington be released on his own recognizance." The judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, looked from Miss Davies to the prosecutor, then back again. You could feel the entire dynamic of the room shift. The prosecution had built their case on one man's word, and now that word was being challenged by irrefutable digital proof. After a tense moment of silence, the judge cleared her throat. "Bail is set at $5,000. It was still a lot of money, but it was attainable. Maya, who had been sitting in the front row looking like she was about to vibrate out of her skin, let out a choked sob of relief. Within a few hours, she had pulled together the money from savings and friends, and I was walking out of the courthouse, blinking in the bright sunlight. The freedom was dizzying, but it was tainted. I was still facing felony charges. I was still a defendant. The fight had only just begun. The next few weeks were a descent into a legal hell I never knew existed. There were hearings, motions, and endless meetings with Miss Davies. The prosecution, despite the video evidence, refused to drop the charges. The police union was backing Officer Miller to the hilt, releasing a statement praising his bravery and restraint in the face of a belligerent suspect. They were doubling down, trying to smear my name, digging through my past for anything they could use against me. They found nothing, but that didn't stop them from leaking vague insinuations to friendly reporters. My mugshot was plastered all over the local news. My name was dragged through the mud. My employer placed me on indefinite administrative leave, a polite term for being fired without being fired. My life was unraveling, thread by painful thread. The videos were everything. Miss Davies had them analyzed, enhanced, and authenticated. Ben, the college kid, and the other witness, a woman named Sarah, both gave sworn depositions confirming what the videos showed. They were scared, but they were determined to tell the truth. Our case was rock solid. So solid, in fact, that the district attorney's office finally offered a deal. They would drop the felony assault charge if I pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor of resisting arrest. No, I told Miss Davies, my voice flat. Absolutely not. I won't admit to something I didn't do.
She smiled, a thin, satisfied smile. That's what I was hoping you'd say. So we prepared for trial. It felt like my entire existence was reduced to preparing for that 1 week in a courtroom. Maya was my rock, keeping me sane, making sure I ate, reminding me to breathe. The day the trial began, I walked into the courthouse feeling a strange sense of calm. The truth was on my side. All we had to do was show it to the jury. The prosecution went first. They put Officer Miller on the stand. He was a perfect witness for them. Calm, confident, his uniform crisp and decorated with medals. He recounted his version of events, a masterclass in fiction. He said I was yelling, acting threateningly, that my eyes were glassy, and that I shoved him before balling my fists. He claimed he punched me in self-defense, using a department-approved stunning technique to subdue a threat. He was so convincing, so utterly believable, that for a split second, I almost doubted my own memory. Looking at the jury, I could see some of them nodding along, their faces etched with sympathy for the brave officer. A cold dread seeped into my bones. What if the videos weren't enough? What if they chose to believe the man in the uniform over the evidence of their own eyes? Then it was Miss Davies' turn. She approached the witness stand not like a predator, but like a scientist approaching a specimen. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "Officer Miller," she began, "you've been with the force for 15 years, is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am, 15 years of dedicated service." "And in those 15 years, how many civilian complaints have been filed against you for excessive force?" The prosecution shot to his feet. "Objection! Relevance?" "It speaks directly to the defendant's pattern of behavior, Your Honor," Miss Davies countered smoothly. "It is highly relevant." "Overruled. The witness will answer the question." Miller's confident smirk faltered for the first time. He shifted in his seat. "I believe there have been a few." "A few?" Miss Davies raised an eyebrow. "Would you say 12 is a few? 12 separate complaints, Officer Miller, not a single one of which resulted in disciplinary action. Is that correct?" He mumbled a yes. The first crack in his armor had appeared. Miss Davies then moved on to the incident itself, dissecting his report line by line, comparing his sworn testimony to the statements he'd made on the scene. The inconsistencies piled up, each one a small cut. He said I was yelling, but none of the witnesses heard me raise my voice. He said I shoved him, but he had no visible injuries and made no mention of it in his initial radio call. Finally, she walked over to a large monitor. "Your Honor, I'd like to play the first video for the court." The courtroom went silent. The grainy cell phone footage filled the screen. There I was, leaning against the pillar, looking at my phone. There was Miller, striding towards me with purpose. The jury leaned forward. They heard the audio, our entire conversation, my calm, even tone, and his escalating aggression. They saw him poke me in the chest. They saw me stand still, my hands at my sides. And then they saw it. A sudden, brutal explosion of violence. The collective gasp in the courtroom was audible. Miss Davies played it again, in slow motion. The image of his fist connecting with my face, stark and undeniable. She played Ben's video, which showed the same thing from a different angle, and then Sarah's. When the videos finished, she turned back to Miller, whose face had gone pale. "Officer Miller," she asked, her voice now sharp as ice,
You testified under oath that you struck Mr. Washington in self-defense after he became belligerent and balled his fists. Is that still your testimony?
He stared at the blank screen, his jaw working silently. He looked at the prosecutor, who avoided his gaze. He looked at the jury, who stared back at him with cold, accusing eyes. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. It happened so fast," he stammered. "My memory of the event, it might be—" "Is it your testimony, yes or no?" Miss Davies pressed. "No," he finally whispered, the word barely audible. He had perjured himself. The prosecution's entire case crumbled into dust in that single moment. They didn't even bother with a closing argument. After Miss Davies delivered a blistering summation, detailing not just the assault, but the subsequent cover-up and malicious prosecution, the jury was sent to deliberate. They were back in less than 20 minutes. I stood, my heart hammering against my ribs, Maya gripping my arms so tightly her knuckles were white. "On the charge of assault in the second degree on a police officer, how do you find the defendant, Marcus Washington?" "Not guilty." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. "On the charge of resisting arrest, how do you find?" "Not guilty." "On the charge of disorderly conduct?" "Not guilty." Maya let out a sob, burying her face in my shoulder. I hugged her back, tears streaming down my own face. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. In the aftermath, everything changed. The verdict was front-page news. The videos went viral, played on a loop on every major network. The public outcry was deafening. The department, facing a massive public relations disaster, had no choice. Officer Miller was fired. But we weren't done. Miss Davies immediately filed a civil lawsuit against him and the city for assault, battery, malicious prosecution, and the violation of my civil rights. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the public verdict, the city settled out of court for a sum that was, as Miss Davies put it, life-changing. But more important than the money was the other condition of the settlement. The district attorney's office launched a full investigation into Miller, and a few months later, he was indicted by a grand jury. The man who had tried to ruin my life was now facing charges of assault, perjury, and official misconduct. I sat in the gallery and watched his trial, just as he had watched mine. I watched as the same videos were played, the same witnesses testified. I watched as his 15 years of unblemished service were revealed to be a lie, a history of bullying and violence that his department had willfully ignored. And I was there when the jury delivered their verdict, guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison. 3 years. It didn't feel like enough for what he took from me, but it was something. It was accountability. It was justice. Today, life is different. The money from the settlement allowed me to start my own graphic design firm with Maya. The scar above my eye has faded, but it's still there, a faint reminder. Sometimes, when I see a police car, that old familiar knot of fear tightens in my stomach. It may never fully go away. But what happened in that train station and in that courtroom did more than just tear my life apart. It put it back together. Stronger. It showed me the power of the truth, the courage of strangers, and the unshakable love of my sister. My name was cleared, but more than that, a liar in a uniform was exposed and a violent man was taken off the streets. It wasn't just my victory. It was a small victory for every person who had ever been voiceless against a system designed to crush them. And that is a story worth telling.